You are listening to Radio Ramadan 365 podcasts.
Chapter 29, Petty Tyrants and the Path. Whenever you feel stuck, whenever you feel concerned, whenever you feel any sense of victimhood about you, don't look at the person who is victimizing you. Use that feeling as an opportunity to explore what you want from the person. It is your expectation that it is creating the experience. You are your own jailer. This is a quote from the chapter using the thought that I'm not good enough, etc., that we often feel. How can we use this quote or insight to transcend and grow?
I don't know how to answer this without repeating exactly what I said there. So, and we have touched on this theme in different ways over the series. And that is that in the first instance, anything that you experience as objectionable and offensive says more about your expectations of the world than it does about the thing that's being done to you.
Right.
And I have a story that demonstrates the case. And I think I've quoted the story before here too. But maybe I don't use that one because I think I've quoted that one before. But it's a thing about people misreading behavior because they're looking at it through an inappropriate cultural lens. So, I mean, South Africa is still battling with its race history. And one of the prejudices that white people have about Black South Africans is that they speak loudly. But they do. I mean, normal conversation between two people sitting next to each other on the bus can be heard on the other side of the street. You know, it's just like the normal, what people are used to, sort of the volume of normal speech is louder than what it is in other contexts. In fact, I think South Africans are probably the loudest people that I know. You know, so very often, just if people are cooking in the kitchen, I can hear word for word what's happening in the kitchen, sitting locked up in my office. So it's loud. Now we had a guy here who experienced this behavior as rude. He was a Namibian, a white Namibian. And that thing eventually got to the point where I actually had to ask him to leave because his racism was now living on his sleeve. You know, it was like really offensive. So he had to leave the Zawia. And that just, what is it in the volume of a voice that one person would find offensive and another person would find completely okay? That means to say that whether the voice is offensive or not has got nothing to do with the volume. It's got everything to do with the prejudice and the judgment of the person who's listening to the voice. So with anything, I mean, how else would you account for the difference between the whole issue of an acquired taste? I'm sure there are things that you can remember tasting the first time as a child that you thought were absolutely vile. How could anybody eat them?
Yep.
And today you eat with relish. I mean, like olives, or that kind of how on earth can anybody call this food? You know, so there are things about what one experiences as objectionable has got nothing to do with the thing. It's got everything to do with your judgment of the thing. That's particularly true in terms of the behavior of people. Yeah. So
I've got a very quick. Sorry.
Carry on.
I'm just going to say that, I've got an example which the office that I work in, one of my colleagues, she always stands in front of me, talking over my head at full volume to the person behind me. And she's quite confronting. So I kind of look over and think, well, can I ask her to walk around? And she's, I've been there for like coming up to a year now, and she's speaking full volume straight over me to the person behind. So I just quietly put my headset in and just allow them to speak until they get it themselves. Because it's so and also in terms of the food, when I was younger, I used to really not like jalebi because it was too sweet. Really, it was too sweet, and it was like, oh. But everyone was like goo goo gaga and mitai, which is like this the very sweet, very very sweet. To the point after the age of 25 onwards, my taste bud changes, and now I can eat it and go, it's not even that sweet. What was the big deal about? Maybe they've changed the recipe, but it's actually it's not that bad. Really not that bad.
No, that's true. That is how things are. So can I go back to your colleague who speaks over your head?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I mean, that person, if it happens often, she would be what we would call a petty tyrant. She's actually probably your biggest ally in the office. If you're serious about being on the path, she is not your enemy, she's your friend. Precisely because she comes up with this behavior. But in order to understand this, we need to first kind of just explore what you're feeling, And I mean, I would guess there's a disrespect in this. I mean, somebody's sort of ignoring you, standing right in front of them, and there's like a dismissiveness, a kind of like a, So what does that say? It says that I have a requirement of others that they should respect me.
By the way, she might be listening to this podcast. She may be listening to this podcast at some point.
Okay, right, okay. Yeah, but the issue is not her, you see.
Exactly.
The issue is that I have this expectation that people should respect. Well, there's two things. I have an expectation that people should respect me, and I also interpret this kind of behavior as disrespectful. Now, while the problem remains her, you don't have access to that exploration because it's about getting her to change the behavior, But if you ask a different question, well, why is it that I'm responding like this? Why is this irritating me? You could then come up with these two reasons. I experience the behavior as disrespectful, and I expect people to respect me. Those are your expectations.
Yep.
Can you change her behavior? Maybe, maybe not. Can you choose what expectations you have? Of course you can.
Yes.
In fact, the reason why Allah puts this objectionable person in front of you is so that she can give you the material to explore your expectations. Because if the world you wouldn't know what your expectations were if the world always only did what you found acceptable. Because if everything that happened to you happened according to your expectations, you wouldn't have the material to explore your expectations because everything will be fine. But it's precisely that the world delivers you with conditions that are contrary to your expectations, that you are and you suffer the discomfort of that. They say, but that means I have this expectation. Now, the moment you realize that you have this expectation now is an object. You can see it. And you can start making choices about it. There's the two that we just teased out of this. The one is wanting to be respected, and the second is that kind of behavior I experience as disrespectful. For both, there's a simple question that you can ask, which is actually the magic question, and that is, how would my life be if I didn't have these two expectations? I mean, the second one is easy. Well, if I didn't have these, if I didn't see that kind of behavior as disrespectful, there'd be a hell of a lot fewer instances where I would be upset. Have an unpleasant experience of being in my skin because I saw that person disrespecting me, you know. But if I don't read the behavior as disrespectful, I don't feel disrespected.
Mm.
But the more interesting one is how would my life experience change if I stopped wanting to be respected by other people? It means that when you walk into the meeting, whether they recognize you're not irrelevant. It means that when some person who's below your status deals with you, you are the same person as the person who deals with you when they're above your status. You know, in other words, you escape the hierarchy, you escape the pecking order. What a liberation! You know, imagine that it doesn't matter to you whether you sit at the back of the hall or the front of the hall. You're as happy.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine the freedom of that. In fact, part of our path out of tasawwuf is precisely to escape being in the pecking order, escaping hierarchy. You know. So in this, that's tyrant view. A person who's really objectionable gives you the opportunity to explore what you find objectionable, and it gives you an opportunity to make a deliberate choice about it. And then you're no longer defined by that conditional motive. You know, I mean, your expectations of the world are based on your conditioning, clearly, you know. And our freedom lies in becoming bigger than our conditioning. You know, who was the being who came into the world before they became Sajjad and had a name and had an identity? Who's that being? Well, you only discover that being by to identify your conditional motive. And you can identify your conditional motive when you have a life experience where things don't suit you. They no longer satisfy your expectations.
Sheikh Sab, we're losing the actual image of you. Could we switch off your video so
my camera?
Audio,
right.
that should improve the audio as well. Sorry, do continue.
Fine. So that's what I think. That's how petty tyrants. That's how petty tyrants are useful to us. That's they help us to explore our conditional motive and transcend it. So you shouldn't be wishing the people who cause you annoyance in your life to disappear. You should wish for them to be more.
Okay. That's a different way to frame it.
That's a social hair shirt. You know where we got why we called Sufis?
No.
It comes from the word wool. The early aspirants on this path used to wear woolen garments. And the reason why they used to wear woolen garments is that raw wool is very unpleasant on your skin. It scratches like hell, you know. That's very unpleasant on your skin. So they wore it so that they can always be irritated. So that they would go beyond their experience of irritation. You know, they wore wool. And sometimes, and this is, I don't know who stole from who, but the medieval Christians did the same thing. They would, you know, even a bishop would wear under his vestments, he'd wear a wool shirt, a wool undershirt. So he's always irritated and scratched by his by his garment. So that's our path. That's the history of our path, to accommodate what is irritating, to transcend what irritates us and our expectations of the world. So
that's
petty tyrants are like social hair shirts.
right. And the word itself, the word Sufi, comes from irritation.
Well, it comes from wool, from wearing woolen garments. And the point of woolen garments is they make you constantly aware, because they itch, they scratch, they itch. No. Makes you itch.
Thank you for that. So who takes over when we forgo control? Khairul Rizqin, the best of providers, or Khairul Mukirin, the best of planners? Does that make me a victim?
No, it doesn't make you a victim. It makes you exactly the opposite.
Mm.
When there's two variables in your life.
Mm-hmm.
There's what you want to get from the world, and there's what you can give to the world. When you construct your intent on what you want to get from the world, you're constructing your intent on something that you, by definition, don't have power over. Somebody other than you has power over that. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want something, then you are a victim, because the authority over what you want lies in the hands of another. At the same time, you always have power over what you're doing in the moment that you're in. In other words, what's leaving you, what you're giving, is always within your control. That's what you have power over. Which basically means to say, when you construct your intent on what you're trying to get, you're a victim, you're in the power of the other. And when you construct your intent on what you can contribute, you become powerful. Any outcome, by definition, sits as a result. It's something that you get. You get an outcome. You know, it's on the getting side of the problem. So if you construct your motive and your happiness on the basis of any outcome, you are actually turning yourself into a victim. To do what is right in the moment that's in front of you requires you to be willing to forego the illusion that you have power over the outcome. That's then putting attention to what you have power over. That's quite the opposite of becoming a victim. That's becoming a master. That's becoming empowered, because that's putting your attention where your power lies. So in fact, you're the opposite of a victim when you recognize that Allah is Khairul Makirin and Allah is Khairul Raziqin. Because you're depositing outcomes where they belong. And you're then focusing your attention to the one thing that you have power over, which is what you do. And you therefore are empowered. You're the opposite of a victim.
Very good. Thank you very much for that, Sheikh. So any attribute which is the opposite of control is an attribute of power. Could you elaborate on this, if we haven't already covered it?
No, we haven't covered it, no. So let's assume you are invited to the court of a king. And at the door, asked for weapons. That's the one experience.
At the door, there's 4 weapons.
No, at the door you get frisked for weapons. They search you. The guards search you. pat you down to see whether you're armed, King
Understand.
1. King 2, nobody frisks you at the door. You go straight into the room. And you have then do your business with this potentate. Which of the two would you say feels insecure?
The first one.
The first one or the second one? The first one. Do powerful people feel insecure?
I think so.
Surely feeling powerful by definition, being powerful means you don't feel insecure.
Correct.
Surely the first person is controlling you.
Agree.
He's trying to make sure that you aren't a danger to him. The second person's not controlling you.
Yeah.
You could walk in armed and he wouldn't take your arms off you. He feels secure.
Yeah.
So control is the opposite of power. Now, how that translates into a working situation, for example, what that means, like in terms of the life that we do, people normally have, sort of like in a business environment. The question to ask is there a difference between the boss that you'll work for because you have to and the boss that you'll work for because you want to? And clearly there is. And if the question is who's the boss that you're going to work for because who's really powerful rather? The boss you're going to work for because you have to and the boss that you work for because you want to, and clearly it's the boss that you work for because you want to.
Thank you very much for that, Sheikh Saab. Thank you very much for that, Sheikh Saab. That's the conclusion for chapter 29.